Mr. President, much has been said and written about the horrific Hamas terrorist attack on Israel on October the 7th. The wanton slaughter of more than 1,000 Israelis and an estimated 200 hostages still being held is hard to fathom. One fact tells the grim story. More Jews died on this day than any time since the Holocaust. It was not just another bad day in the Middle East. It was a premeditated slaughter of historic proportion. The crisis that has followed has touched many in my home state of Illinois who have family in Israel. On Friday, I was relieved to learn of the release of Natalie and Judith Ronan from Evanston, who were being held as hostages by Hamas in Gaza. Another 2 women, thankfully, were released yesterday. Now the Hamas terrorists must release the remaining hostages that were captured on October 7th. I pray every moment for their safe return. Mr. President, throughout my career in Congress, I have supported U.S. assistance to help Israel defend itself from those bent on its destruction. I am not naive. I know the creation of the nation of Israel was controversial in its time and still is to many today. And yet it struck me that the people of that region deserved an opportunity to live in peace, to find one refuge in the world they could count on. And I've always supported Israel because of that. And I will strongly support the President's proposed supplemental request to help Israel, Ukraine, and other urgent humanitarian needs. The Hamas attack, which had nothing to do with solving the problems between the Jewish people and Palestinians, was really not advancing a 2-state solution or even seeking long-term peace. It was a reminder that there are still those in the region who refuse to accept Israel's right to exist, literally their right to exist, and will take any actions to destroy it. But in acknowledging Israel's understandable rage and pain, I believe President Biden gave wise counsel to learn from America's mistakes made after the similarly traumatic attacks on 9/11. I remember that day. I was in this building just outside the chamber, 9/11/2001. I couldn't imagine what had happened to my nation as we were evacuating the Capitol to stand out on the lawn and pray that another airplane was not directed toward the Capitol or the White House. It changed America, in some ways for the better. We were united, we were determined, we were really in focus with one another to try to make this a safe country for our kids and grandkids. And it divided us as well. We made some decisions which were thoughtful, wise, and stood the test of history, and some that did not. Hamas, just like Al-Qaeda in those days, must be destroyed. But Israel should be wary of the kind of overreach we found after 9/11. You do not want an ill-thought occupation of Gaza to become your Fallujah. You do not want to dehumanize the innocents on the periphery who are not your enemy and will have to be your neighbors in the future. Hamas is a terrorist organization that has a long and cynical history of hiding its military assets among and around innocent civilians. They dare their enemies to attack and realize that the collateral damage is going to be devastating. That makes any effort to root them out and rescue hostages extraordinarily difficult. But let us be clear, the Palestinian people are not Hamas. As a democracy, Israel must follow the rules of war and not target civilians or conduct disproportionate or indiscriminate attacks. We're already seeing a distressing humanitarian crisis building in Gaza, which has the potential to become worse. As such, I joined several Senate colleagues in calling for the U.S. humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, a move President Biden made last week. The suffering of the Palestinians cannot be ignored. Tom Friedman said it even better last week when he said, Hamas has not only taken Israelis hostage, it's taken Gaza's civilians hostage as well. The passions and pain from these events are not limited to the Middle East. They are manifest all over our nation, even in my state of Illinois. 10 days ago, a 6-year-old Palestinian American, Wadea Al-Fayoum, was murdered in a suburb of Chicago in a mindless, heartbreaking act. Almost every hour of every day, there's been a photograph of this beautiful little boy in a happy birthday hat, standing smiling, looking at the camera. It's hard to imagine that he answered his door, and simply because he was of Palestinian descent, he was attacked by a crazed man who killed him and then attempted to kill his mother. I was glad President Biden mentioned Wadea last week in his address to the nation, and I have that family in my thoughts and prayers as they grieve for their little boy and for their mother who continues to recover. There have also been fears of a bomb threat at a synagogue outside of Chicago, and a weekend protest in Skokie ended in shots fired. President Biden was eloquent in reminding us that such hate must stop and that we are all Americans. I had my differences with George W. Bush, but I think one of the most profound things he said or did after 9/11 was to announce publicly that he did not believe that those who believed in the Muslim faith were wrong at their heart. He believed that it was a religion of peace, and some were trying to corrupt it. Those were so critical. Those statements were so critical at the time when hatred could light up in just any moment. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab hate have no place in America or anywhere in the world. During my time in Congress, I've been an advocate for a two-state solution, one that provides safe and secure nations for both Israeli and Palestinian people. There have been attempts at peace in 2 states that offered some hope: Israeli peace with Egypt and Jordan and the Oslo Accords. Some leaders, such as former Israeli Prime Minister Rabin and Egyptian President Sadat, paid with their lives for pursuing peace. But for too long, spoilers on both sides have undermined a peaceful 2-state solution. They've pursued narrow, selfish political goals, too often determined to stay in power above all else. Settlements have expanded and have continued eruptions, of violence. Regional powers have claimed to care about but only paid lip service to the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian Authority has been mired in corruption and a lack of new leadership or vision for more than 2 decades, too often at the very expense of the Palestinian people. I know it will be hard, but I hope out of the ashes and pain of this crisis, there will be a new renewed focus on a 2-state solution. Out of the devastating Yom Kippur War came the unimaginable at that time, an historic peace treaty between Egypt and Israel that still endures. So with the right leaders on both sides, it can be done. And we here in the United States have a responsibility for a renewed push forward toward finding a solution that allows Israel and the Palestinian children to once and for all live together safely in peace and dignity. Mr. President, I yield the floor.